Welcome to I Said What I Said, a sports podcast giving you opinions not heard anywhere else. I'm your host, Brad Wakai, alongside my co-host, Tyson Gentry. Tyson, we're back doing our top five at each position heading into NFL draft season. We did quarterbacks earlier in the week, so go check out that episode if you're curious about what we think about that class, give our evaluations. Today, we're doing receivers and corners. We'll line up on one side, and the people are going to try to stop them. That's who we're looking at here. Before we get into it, like, subscribe, and share the show. Smash that before we get started. Tyson, we're going to start with wide receivers. Good wide receiver class, great wide receiver class. In an earlier iteration of our podcast, you said it's the best one we've seen, and that includes the 2020 class.
It's the best one we've seen in a while. That's what I'll say. I think it's easier to cheerlead a lot of these guys as prospects than it is nitpick. There's no Quinyon Johnston in the top of this class. There's no like some of these guys are going to miss, and that's the reality of the situation. But when a wide receiver goes in the top 10, everyone looks around and goes, "That guy's going to be good." Like unless something extracurricular happens, more times than not, those guys end up being really good. This class has three of them, and that's like at the end of the day, whatever you thought about Drake London as a prospect, he's closer to Rome Odunze. He's going to be might end up being the third wide receiver off the board here, or even if he's second. I think that we keep saying you don't say generational, and we're not going to say it in this episode, but there are three guys that in any other class would be comfortably number one. They just happen to all be born essentially in the same year.
So let's get into the number one guy. Both have him. Marvin Harrison Jr. should come as no surprise. Though we'll have a couple of conversations about we think it's a little bit closer than people think. But when you look at a prototype wide receiver, and especially in this day and age, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. Like strong hands, gets open, has a great body control, has speed, can beat the cornerback physically, can beat him with athleticism. This guy just is a no-brainer to me. If you're going to take somebody high, especially if you're the Cardinals sitting at 4 and you want to restart the clock, pair somebody with Kyler Murray after you lost a couple good wide receivers. This to me is the no-brainer. Like you got to take him. I don't have virtually any red flags on him, and it's hard for me to say that, especially when we go through the draft process. But I love Marvin Harrison Jr. I just saw him torch my school for freaking 3 years, man. So. They got nothing but good things to say about him now.
Well, just kind of like the whole time he was at Ohio State, it was like, this guy's coming, oh, he's here. And there was never like, oh, there's a crack in the armor there or something he doesn't do well. It's a guy who leads the class in yards per route run, touchdowns per route run, and first downs per route run. It's pretty good. And those are like the three biggest indicators of success as you go to the next level. Breakout age is great amongst like all these wide receivers, essentially, besides one of the guys I'll talk about later. The only question I have is maybe his yards after catch ability. It's not a huge concern because I don't think Marvin Harrison Jr. is catching screen passes. I don't think that's the way he's going to be used in the NFL. Is he good at contested catches? He's not great. Like he's not the best in the class at contested catches. So that like you could potentially be like, I don't like that out of my 6'3" wide receiver. But he's just smooth, man. And I think, if his name was like Ron Smith, he would still be the number one wide receiver in this class. I think it helps to have the lineage that he does, but on his own merit, this dude is nasty.
Yeah, absolute stud. There's just not a lot to talk about with Marvin Harrison Jr., man. He just a flat-out stud, number one on our board. But number two for you, and you've been kind of hinting at this, and we waited until this episode for you to go, but you have Malik Nabers at your number two.
Yeah, and I think it's really close. I was really close to putting him at one. If his name was Reggie Wayne Jr., we might be having a different conversation here. But this is like the knock, so to speak, that I had for Marvin Harrison was maybe his yak ability. Malik Nabers is the best yards after catch guy in the class. 30% of first tackle opportunities were missed on this guy a year ago. That's far and away the best in this class. He can play inside, he can play outside, and I don't say this lightly, but there's a lot of Antonio Brown in Malik Nabers' game, and we've seen the way that looked at the next level. There's a lot of smaller CeeDee Lamb in his game, I guess, is another way to put that, because I think those guys are similar, even though, when you look at him, you might not see it. Doesn't score a ton of touchdowns, and I think that's something that you could pick at him for. His yards per route run was good, not great. Like he's kind of around 15th, 16th in a lot of the important categories that you look for, but he's the number one in the dog. He's the most, I think, tenacious guy in this draft class. And I think that, if you run 10,000 simulations of these guys' career, Marvin Harrison Jr. ends up better in 5,005.
So we have our 2 and 3 flipped. I had Rome Odunze. Just the more I watched this, the more I thought about it. He just fits everything that I love in a receiver. And so maybe that's just my bias coming in. But, that's what happens when you scout, to be completely honest. Like, listen to DJ, Daniel Jeremiah, listen to Lance Zierlein, listen to whoever you want to listen to, Bucky Brooks, or whoever your favorite scout is. They're all going to have some bias coming in when it comes to this process. And I love big, athletic receivers. Like that's like my dream combination, right? I love the Julio Jones. I love the Larry Fitzgerald. I love Calvin Johnson. If you are fast, athletic, and are big, like that's a dream for me. Running a 4.5 40 at 6'3", vertical jump 39 inches. He's the best contested catcher in this class. Again, I wish I could shout out whoever put this together, but I remember this. Every single route tree
Matt Walden.
Matt Walden, thank you. Every single route tree run, or every single route in the route tree that he's ran during his last season was green, which is good. He's the only receiver in this class who did that. Like, he's a great route runner. He gets open. He can get contested catches. I think his game translates against any cornerback in the NFL. So that's why I have him above Nabers, although I'll talk about him here soon. Just to me, this is another can't miss guy. Like, if you need a wide receiver and you're drafting high, you are so ever falls into your lap.
You gotta be pumped. You have to be over the moon with any of these guys. And I'm if I'm not mistaken, Rome Odunze's whole route tree was green, meaning he's plus route runner at every single one of those. Not the first, or not the only one in this class. I think he's the only one in the history of reception perception that Matt Walden puts together to have a route tree chart look like that. So there's years of data to kind of back up, like, hey, this guy can play a little bit. You mentioned the contested catch thing. I think everybody in the world is like, man, it's like 75% of the time he came down with the football. That's otherworldly. It was not like that in 2022. If you were going to knock something, it would be like, oh, maybe, he was this year an outlier. That's not necessarily, like, I think this isn't it's not a up and down kind of thing. This is the thing he got much better at. Like, drops aren't a sticky stat. Catching the football in a contested catch situation, I think, is a lot more sticky than maybe can you catch it when you're wide open. Again, not a ton of touchdowns, but he dropped 2 balls, 140 targets. Like, you talk about hands, he's the best in the class. And that includes 2 guys that we just kind of gushed over, or at least one guy that we both gushed over, and then one I'm sure you're going to here in a minute. Rome Odunze is really, really good. I think that the New York Giants have a heck of a decision to make it 6. I think if the Chargers want to go with a wide receiver, they have a heck of a decision to make it 5. With the way that the mock drafts are setting up right now, the Chicago Bears are looking around like, it doesn't matter to us. Like, we'll take either one of these guys, because at the end of the day, Rome Odunze is closer to an all-pro level talent than he is to just the number 2 on a football team. And he might walk into a situation, he might get Drake London, so to speak, and not because Drake London was kind of buried on the depth chart the way that I project Rome Odunze is going to be. But don't forget about this guy going into year 2, because if he has to walk into a room with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and those guys, we're going to go, oh, well, his rookie year wasn't all that impressive. This is a 100-catch guy year in and year out. This is a safety blanket. This is a number 1 best friend for a quarterback who also has the highest average depth of target in the class. Like, this isn't a one-trick pony. This is whatever you need me to do, I might be the best at it.
And so Malik Nabers, my number 3, and like Tyson said, I think this guy's just a complete stud. I mean, you lead the SEC in receptions in 2022. then you're second in the FBS in yards the year after. Led the SEC again in receptions. Like, the guy's just productive, and that's the thing you look for. That's what you want, especially at the SEC level. Like, I shit on the Pac-12 and the Big 12 at times, just because I don't think it's the same level of football, which it's not, as the SEC and the Big 10. So if you're doing this in the SEC and it's not some slap conference like the Pac-12 or the Big 12, that opens your eyes for sure. The reason why I have him 3 behind Odunze, it's, again, the size thing. He's just 6 foot. 200. Me personally, I like the big guys who can run and be athletic. Like, that's my personal bias. But the guy's a stud, man. And Malik Nabers is a freak. You laid out the positives extremely well. There's really nothing I can take away from it. The only thing I nitpicked is the size thing. You can't teach size. And for me, that's why I have him number 3. And before we get into our 4 and 5 here, Tyson, I want to say it's just funny. I'm looking at these comparisons from Lance Zierlein, and comparisons, you have to do it, right? Because if you're comparing stuff, you want to compare body size, you want to compare body type and who they could potentially be and what they are at the next level. Marvin Harrison Jr., his comparison in the NFL is CeeDee Lamb. Odunze's comparison, the NFL, Larry Fitzgerald.
Okay.
Malik Nabers' comparison in the NFL is Justin Jefferson. 3 pretty good names to put your names to, man.
That's a crazy. I mean, you think when he's going through that, he's just like, maybe I should pump the brakes like a little bit. Although it's probably plugging into a model, and the model's telling him these are the guys with the same production numbers and size. But yeah, those are 3 insane names, and it's pretty funny here because in our quarterback episode earlier in the week, we kind of talked about others a teardrop after Caleb Williams to the 2 and 3, and then another mini teardrop there to the rest of them. Here, that like there might be a teardrop after Marvin. It's not big, and then I think that there's a teardrop after certainly after the top 3, and then there's a ton of guys that you can kind of talk yourself into one way or the other. So we're only doing a top 5 list. You could put 10 guys on our top 5 list. We could have ties for 5th going on for another hour and a half.
So who's your 4?
My 4 is Xavier Legette. And if you're kind of looking around and you're like, I haven't heard his name a whole lot in this process, I don't expect him to go as high as, Brian Thomas Jr., as probably Ladd McConkey, as the Texas wide receivers. But this is a 6'3" freak from South Carolina. I don't believe that he did Spencer Rattler a lot more favors than Spencer Rattler did him in college. And this is a physical wide receiver. He's going to compete with you at the line of scrimmage in a way that I don't think anybody in the class really is going to. I think, and South Carolina has some pretty rich history of putting out these second-round wide receivers that end up smashing. And those are the $100 million guys, right? His slot numbers, 35% of his production was from the slot in 2023. That's pretty good for somebody that's 6'3". 65% of his slot numbers were wide, obviously, and a lot of those were deep. And so he's showing you he can do both things. He didn't put up any numbers before 2023, and he wasn't hurt before 2023. Like, this is a guy, I think he played 40 games with like 600 snaps in his college career before this 5th-year breakout that he had, and that's a valid concern. I'm choosing to overlook that because I think sometimes I think with the wide receivers especially, we can get caught up in sort of a fantasy football mindset of like, man, if this dude doesn't put up crazy numbers, then of course he's not the 4th best wide receiver in the class. I think this is a guy that's going to be able to walk in and play real-life football for a long time, going to make an NFL team really happy.
He's just missed my top 5. He's a super intriguing prospect to me. I love what Tyson just laid out. For me, I'm going back to the LSU boys here, man. Brian Thomas Jr. And if you're like, oh, wait, are you just going to talk about the same thing? Of course I am. It's the size, it's the speed, and that's what you're getting in Brian Thomas Jr. The dude's a beast. 6'3", 209, 4.33 40-yard dash. Athleticism score, he was 2nd at the combine. The guy's a freak of nature. 38.5-inch vertical jump. He's productive too. He's not just out there doing BS and looking good, right? Led all FBS and receiving touchdowns with 17. Played in 13 games, 12 starts. So, I mean, he's not even out there. He wasn't even really like the forefront, right? It was Nabers. You think of Malik Nabers, and this guy's being productive on the other side. I know you're going to have some questions about him. And I think it's warranted. I'll let you kind of go through those. But when I look at Brian Thomas Jr., to me, he looks like a DK Metcalf. He looks like, just a Deebo Samuel. He's a little bit bigger than that. But one of these guys who's big, physical, and fast. And I think that's going to translate to the next level, especially with the hip drop tackle being gone, especially with how you can't just get blasted over the middle. These freaks of nature who are just big and strong and physical and can produce, find a way to get open, that translates to me. And I think that's where we talk about Johnson from last year, when you were super down on Quinton Johnson, who you were super down on. You're like, I don't know about that. And look how that translated, right? Can't get open. This guy's gonna get open, and so he's my number 4 receiver. I think he has a bright future.
Yeah, I don't think there's any Quinton Johnson in his game. And I think, like, part of the reason I didn't like Quinton Johnson is I don't want my 6'3" receiver, my 210-pound wide receiver being a screen pass savant, right? Like, let's go deep. And that's what Brian Thomas Jr. does better than anybody in the class. He's the premier deep threat in this wide receiver class. And like, there's a lot to like about him. I'll go into that maybe a little bit first. Like, I think everybody kind of has this misconception. Well, he played with Malik Nabers, so he was drawing QB2 or cornerback 2 the whole time. This was throw your best corner out there on an island, because Malik is moving around the formation, and Brian Thomas Jr. is getting that one-on-one with whoever you think is the best over and over again, and he consistently won those matchups. I think this is a guy where you look at him and you go, man, I don't know if he runs the best routes, but when you cut the film on, he's open every play. He's always open. He's 4 yards open. He's crushing dudes. And I think that if he goes to a team where they're going to be like, hey, we're going to put you in this specific role that you've shown that you're very, very good at, his ceiling is through the roof. Like, I think if he comes out the same draft class as Jameson Williams, remember the hype around JMO?
Mm-hmm.
We're having some real conversations about which guy is going to be a better deep threat. Granted, that might not be, again, the most comforting thing to hear if you're a big Brian Thomas Jr. guy. But this is my number one concern. He's bad against zone coverage. He's bad against zone coverage. He's not below average against zone coverage. He is bad. He has less than 2 yards per route run against zone and a Pro Football Focus grade of 63.7, which is the second worst in the class. And I think that in the NFL, you might be able to draw a little bit more man-to-man than you were going to draw at LSU, because kind of the book goes out on that house and it's like, oh, they don't play well against the zone. So is that coaching? Is that him? I don't know, but I think that as we kind of go to, you see it when you watch the NFL, everybody's playing too high. Well, that's fine. I'm going to beat both of them. I'm faster. Like, you can get on your horse right now. I'm gone. But I do think that there is a lack of football intelligence that you don't really love to see amongst a guy that you're projecting to be a number one receiver right away. And I think that the way people are talking about him at the moment is like, well, Brian Thomas Jr. can fill that role for the Bills. I don't believe that's the case. But I think that if for some reason he goes 32 to Kansas City, this dude he's breaking every touchdown record in the book.
Jameson Williams, my number one wide receiver out of his class. So I think I loved him. I think we're going to see a big breakout here from JMO. Wrapping up receivers for me, Adonai Mitchell from Texas. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, folks. It is what it is. This class is like my perfect class, man. You're big, you're fast, You're strong. Like 6'2", 205, runs a 4.34, 39.5-inch vert, 11.4 broad. Come on, man. What do you want me to do here? I mean, just 11 receiving touchdowns for Texas. And they had dudes. Like, they had guys. That was a stacked Texas receiving class. But for me, and he transferred from Georgia, he came in with the accolades there. He didn't play there, so maybe that's a little bit of concern. If you can't find your way there, if you're supposed to be a guy, you got to go out. Okay, then maybe that's a little bit of a red flag. But I think in one productive year as a junior, you're coming out. Maybe he just kind of found himself at 21, 20, and he's going to be able to translate. He's not a guy that's I put on the same level as my top 4. So I think there's the top 3 in the class. I think Brian Thomas for me is a separator, kind of that second tier. I think the rest of the guys for me are below Brian Thomas. And when Mitchell, Legette, like you said, I have my number 6. Ladd McConkey, who I like a lot. There's certain things all of them can do well, but I think there's more question marks about him. And I think for me, what does the production look like for Mitchell against higher competition? Is he going to be able to do it when he couldn't at Georgia in the SEC, but he did at the Big 12? That's my concern. I don't think he's ever going to be a number 1 guy. Maybe he's a number 2. Maybe he's a really good number 3. But I think in this class, this is a guy that I take a chance on.
I got A.D. Mitchell a little bit farther down than you. But again, I think that there's a huge group of guys that you can and it's whatever mood I'm in when I wake up in the morning is essentially how I'm thinking about these dudes. Like, you can rearrange them quite a bit here. But I don't think, like, when I watch him, I don't see that athleticism translate necessarily the way that I would want to. And that's a big concern for me, because for a guy with these measurables and the numbers to not necessarily back it up. Now, Texas had a wild kind of group of skill position players, and everybody ate. And it's a little bit different when you have Jonathan Brooks in the backfield versus some of these other guys that we're talking about at the top of the wide receiver class. So maybe he gets more looks if he's in a pass-happy offense like Washington or like LSU. But, yeah, I think, again, he could be a really good player. Who else did you have that just kind of missed? Because, we got to at least give a little shout to Ladd McConkey. You got to give a little shout to Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, Xavier Worthy. You can run down all the way. I'd give a shout out to Johnny Wilson. Like, when did this dude run a 4.5? Like, that's crazy right now.
No, it's deep, man. No, so the guys who missed for me, Legette, Ladd McConkey, a little bit. I think I'm a little bit higher on him, but Tez Walker and Troy Franklin. Like, those guys I'm all looking at. I'm like, man, I could have an argument about who's going to be in the 5th spot. I was a little bit higher on Legette. I'm definitely higher on McConkey than I think a lot of other people. He just, to me, if you're going to catch the football and get open, that translates to me. Like, you're going to have a role in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, enjoy the ride if your team needs a wide receiver, because there's a ton of them this year, and it's funny because last year Quentin Johnston got elevated up draft boards because he was big and everybody else in the class was tiny. Look, I'll just get one more Malik Nabers shout in here. I think there's something to be said about a 6 foot, 200-pound receiver being unquestionably in that top group in this class of giants.
Let's move into the corners. We're coming off of a receiving class who, I think we both are now saying is probably the best we've seen in a long time. I think it's better than the 2020 class. This cornerback class, I think there's a few guys at the top that we're looking at like, okay, you can be really good. And the rest, there are some questions or they're specialists. I'll just put it that way. Your number one guy just climbed up the boards after the season. Quinyon Mitchell. Tell everybody why he's your number one guy.
I feel like I should have you tell everybody because I think you bet on his college football team more than anybody else in the country this last year. So I know you've seen plenty of Quinyon Mitchell. Is a prototypical size plus speed, really good ball skills. He's a ball hawk, and honestly, he was close. Him and Terrion Arnold, I think, were really close for me until the Senior Bowl. And then all the stories were like, man, Quinyon Mitchell is out here strapping everybody up. Like all these dudes that we're excited about in this wide receiver class that we're talking about. And he shows up and it's like, can this dude really do it against the high-level player? Yes, was the answer, and it seemed to be pretty resounding. He's also a willing tackler. He's not like a very good tackler, but he'll stick his nose in there and kind of get after it a little bit. The numbers won't necessarily show you that. But in this draft class, like I think all these dudes are very close to each other, and I think he has the least amount of question marks. And he has, again, like when you can run 4.3 and you can move your hips and you're a fluid athlete, you stand a much better shot than some of these dudes we're going to get into later.
I have Terrion Arnold, and again, this is super close to me, and we have 1 and 2 flipped. I just redshirt sophomore at Alabama. Anytime you talk about an Alabama cornerback, though, you always got to be a little bit careful because they're getting coached up by Nick Saban. We know that means they're a little bit projected. They're projected to be better than they actually turn out to be sometimes. I'm a little bit worried about the athleticism part with Arnold. Athletic score, he's 18th in his class, 4.5 40, not necessarily what you're looking for, but he did have a 37-inch vertical jump. It's production that is what you're really looking at with him. He's just a solid cornerback. I think he's going to be able to cover well. I think he's going to be able to tackle well. I think he's going to do all those things you ask for him. Is he going to be able to stay one-on-one on the island? I think that's where the concern is. Again, I said there were red flags with pretty much every single player in this class. To me, it's that. What's the athleticism look like when he's one-on-one with a Brian Thomas, with a Justin Jefferson? I mean, let's just talk about the guy in the NFL like right now. I mean, Devontae Adams one-on-one. Like, is he going to be able to go with them? He's going to be able to cover. So that's the question marks I think you have with him. But I think if you can have him be the secondary guy or even just command a certain type of role, I think he's going to be a good player, good enough for him to be my number one because I think his floor is the highest out of anybody in this class.
Yeah, I think he's probably the most technical. He's got at least the most technique on tape, I'll say. And I know the Nick Saban thing is fun. Typically, that kind of goes to the guy that we all hype up for 3 years. Terrion Arnold snuck up on everybody, right? Like this is a guy where maybe before the year, what Kool-Aid was the one. He was going top 5 in all the mocks, and then all of a sudden the season was going on, and it was like, oh, Terrion Arnold did what to the dudes from Texas, and he did what to Roman Wilson, and all of these things are good. He's a better tackler than Quinyon Mitchell, and he's a more willing tackler, and I think that's going to bode really well for him. I don't see as much like he has athletic limitations, but I don't think he's like super rigid or not fluid enough to be able to play at a high level in the NFL. So I think he's going to be a good player, and I think depending on scheme fit, he might be the one that kind of just sticks around as your Trent McDuffie type for a long time in the NFL.
And yeah, Quinyon Mitchell, my number 2. I think when you look at him on paper, like he's the prototype, right? Like he's just super big, athletic, strong. I mean, he kind of does it all. And that's what you're looking for. The tackling, okay. I think when we talk about cornerbacks, come on. I mean, are we really expecting
tackler for a corner?
Yeah, there we go. So that's the thing. I think when we're looking at it, a little bit of tightness, does that translate well to the NFL? He was at Toledo for a reason. I don't want to knock that, but especially in this transfer portal era when everybody's coming to call, he's leaving Toledo, right? But I think he's a super, super talented guy. I think his ceiling might be the highest out of anybody in this class. I'll put it that way. I think he's going to give you speed. He's going to give you size. He's going to give you what you want. He can turn into potentially a guy you can stick on an island. And that's, if you're looking for a guy who's just going to be the number one in a race, opposing number one wide receiver, this could be the guy in the class. It could also be, man, I don't know, he's a little bit tight. We have to transition him to safety a few years down the line because, it goes quick with corners, right? Like the athleticism goes quick. And if you don't necessarily have the type of ball skills or all those sorts of things that go with being a corner in the NFL, you get transitioned out pretty quick.
Well, you want to talk about somebody who is maybe not a willing tackler here. At number 3 for me is Nate Wiggins from Clemson. And you mentioned that you think Quinyon Mitchell has the highest upside in the class. I think Nate Wiggins, like if you squint really hard, you can see the best cornerback in the NFL. Right? He's huge. He's incredibly fast. This dude doesn't want to hit anybody, and he's very skinny. And I've fallen into the trap a few times in my life of being like, I don't want that corner because I want somebody who's going to come up and hit. And it works when it's Devin Witherspoon. It doesn't work when you're kind of going back and forth about Sauce Gardner because we see how that works out. I had him at cornerback 2. It wasn't like I was all the way down on this guy, but I would consider that a miss, and that's something I'm trying to learn from. I think Nate Wiggins, look, there's only a certain amount of guys in the NFL that can just turn and run with somebody at the cornerback position. He's going to join that group here in 3 weeks as soon as he gets his name called. I think this is probably a late second half of the first round kind of guy. But again, this thing could go up in a ball of flames, I think, quicker than the guys that I have above him.
Yeah, he's my number 3 as well. Listen, you want somebody who can run. If you want somebody who can run with the top guy who's going to take the top off, he can run with them. Like, that's what you're getting in Nate Wiggins. But if you run the football to that side, you can also block him with the twig. Like,
there's 10 yards. Easy.
Yeah, he doesn't want to do it, right? He doesn't want to tackle. He doesn't want to get off blocks. He's a poor weak side pursuer of the football. I think that was really what jumped out when you're watching him. But he can cover. He can certainly cover. He can break up passes. He's instinctual. The size is the question, and it's not the height. He's super thin, super lean. Is he going to be able to put on weight, or is he just going to get bullied? Like, if you're on the goal line, if you're in a goal line set, Devontae Adams one-on-one, come on. Like, that's where you get
Keon Coleman one-on-one on the goal line. Like, Devontae Adams is going to do nasty things to this guy.
Yeah, so I think you think his ceiling's much higher than me. I think he can be a really good cornerback in the NFL if everything hits, because if not, he's going to get bullied out, and we may be seeing like a quick one for Nate Wiggins. Your number 4 is an interesting one. I want you to talk through this.
So I'm the only one in the country, I think, with Max Melton at number 4. And look, whether that's because nobody watches Rutgers football or because he's not as good as I think, it's probably the latter, but I'm going to pretend it's the former. Like, he's a competitor. And we're going through the other guys, and we're like, man, he doesn't want to pursue. He doesn't want to play the run. Max Melton there's no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm here to play football. And he's a much better athlete than people are giving him credit for. His 2022 tape is a lot better than his 2023 tape. And if this was a year ago and he was eligible to come out, he's closer to the number 1 corner in that draft class than he is to the number 1 corner in this draft class. He didn't have a great year. They didn't have a great year. How much of that is him? How much of that was the surrounding circumstances of his college career? But again, when I'm kind of looking at this, and just full disclosure, I don't have Cooper DeJean in my top 5 here because I'm saving him for the safety episode. So that's why I have Max Melton here at 4. But like give me the guy that is going to show up and work every single day and compete and hit more than, I don't want to have to talk myself into, was it Lassiter from Georgia?
Yeah,
Like,
Marshawn
he
Lassiter.
might be a better player. He runs a 4.6, and that's going to be hard in the NFL.
Well, my number 4 is Cooper DeJean, and if you're wondering, that's the white guy. That's what everybody's been talking about. It's the white cornerback. And Tyson already said it. Well, it's safety. That's what everybody says, which I think is hilarious. Because you watch him on tape, and the guy is a freak, man. He's a really good football player. Has size, has speed. He's 6 foot tall, 202 pounds, 205 pounds. I think he's going to be a physical guy, and he can run too. He ran 4.4, 4.5 at his pro day.
Yeah,
something like that.
It was like might have been high 4.3, whatever it was. People were like, "Whoa!"
Yeah, people were like, "Man, this is kind of crazy." I'll listen to some people are like, "This Cooper's been on the radar for people for a while, like for a long time, just because he's been a great athlete at Iowa, and you kind of watch him, and you're like, huh, that kind of looks a little bit different. I didn't know that white corners could cover like that." And so that's what I think is hilarious.
Could move like that.
That's the other thing too. Besides their offensive linemen, who always have like an insane freak on the left side. But I always think it's funny. It's like, well, we can see Cooper DeJean going to safety. I'm like, that's an interesting statement. Whether or not he does or not, I think this is a really good football player. I think he's going to get a shot at cornerback in the NFL. How long that lasts, we'll see. He may make the transition. I don't think it's going to be in his rookie year. I think if you're going to draft Cooper DeJean, you're going to give him a shot at cornerback. How that works out, we'll see. But he's really fast. He's physical. He can cover. He has great ball skills. And when he does make a play on the ball, he can go to the house. That's what he's shown since he's been playing college football. Now he's coming off an injury. That's why he's a little bit lower on people's boards than I think he should be. Because if he played a full football season and he was able to get everything on tape, he didn't get injured, I think we're talking about a guy who could potentially be number 3 in this class. I think he's that good.
I think he's got the best instincts. Like, that's part of the reason that I think that safety makes sense. Is I think that if you can put him at a more instinctual position, and more like Cooper DeJean might. It sounds funny because it sounds like low key kind of racist, but he football smarts. Like, his football intelligence is very high. Right? He's a hard worker. He's a lunch pail guy. He's first in line.
Sneaky athletic.
Yes, his instincts are really, really good, and I think that NFL teams are going to look at that and be like, well, he can hide more things at safety for us than he probably can at corner. So that's where I don't disagree with anything that you said. I think Cooper's, I think he gets a full year on tape, and 3 years from now we might be going, oh, he's the best corner in this NFL draft class. But for my number 5, this is similar to my Quinton Johnson a year ago, where I didn't know where to put this guy, and I feel like he had to have a spot in here. So I'm going with Kool-Aid McKinstry, and I think you hop in a time machine, you go back 4 months, and you go, like, how is he slid down draft boards so much? It's because he's rigid. He's not the most fluid athlete. This is the Saban guy that I think people have kind of tricked themselves on, because his football smarts are really good, and his name is super cool. And like, when you watch him, he looks like he's a good athlete, and then he goes up against the Texas guys, and like, we know how that looked, and we know how he looked in those big moments. What did Malik Nabers do to him in November when they played? He's a great press corner. I think he might be the best. He's not a great press corner. He's a good press corner. He might be the best one in this class at playing press man. The problem is they run that a lot in the SEC. They don't run that a ton in the NFL, because you're going to get jumped off the line of scrimmage, and these dudes are really good, and he doesn't have the athleticism to turn and run, because by the time he turns around, you get 2 yards of separation already, and that's kind of the big thing here. I'm not going to get into, like, there's a lot of stuff right now about how good of a teammate is he, his body language and all of those things. I thought his body language sucked, but I think a lot of these corners' body language sucks. I think that goes with playing the position of corner. I think the Kool-Aid McKinstry, he could be a good player. I think more likely he's going to start his career as a special teams player and work his way into a starting role, where he's going to kind of live at that number 2 spot, where, it's easier to draw 2017 Adam Thielen every week than it is to draw some of these other guys.
Yeah, because you mentioned putting him on an island, I think you're going to run into trouble. Like, you're going to get burned over the top with him unless you give him a cushion, and then is he going to be able to get downhill and recover? And that's the problem, I think, when you're looking at. But he's a good player, right? Like he's a productive, good football player. He's smooth in a way, right? Like when he's out there and he's making plays, you're like, man, he looks good. And I think that's everybody's like, how is he not higher up on everybody's board? Or I want Kool-Aid McKinstry. But when you kind of look at it, what's going to translate to the NFL, it's the lack of overall athleticism. And I know his pro day, I think he ran what, a 4.45 or a 4.5. And you're like, man, that was faster than we thought. He had a hurt toe. So, that'll make people be like, okay, all right, maybe we could take a chance on him. But when he's got the pads on, when he's playing against other elite athletes who had the pads on, dude was behind them a lot of the time. And that's what does concern you with him. I think if you're looking for a really good football player who you can plug at certain positions in your secondary, that's what you're getting in Kool-Aid. That's why he got into my top 5. I think that's why he probably got into yours, despite some of the question marks we had in him. Because I think he's a solid football player. I think his floor is high. It's just that he might have pretty much been maxed out at Alabama. That's the issue.
Yeah, and I'm more comfortable saying that I think Kool-Aid McKinstry has a higher ceiling than like Rakestraw from Missouri or Lassiter from Georgia, like some of these other dudes, and they could end up being better players. But we've seen Kool-Aid do it at a higher level against a higher level of competition. But again, like the best corner in this class is going to end up being somebody like Johnny Dixon, right? Or like it's going to be somebody like that where they're taken in the 3rd round and they're able to play, and that's corner is really, really hard to project, especially because like not only are the talent levels different in these conferences in college football, but the way they play is so different. Like if you're a Big 12 corner, you get 70 reps a game. If you're a Big 10 corner, you get 14 passes thrown at you all season. So it's harder to kind of identify those things, but at the end of the day, somebody's going to come out of left field here, I think, is going to emerge as the best corner in 3 years' time.
Yeah, I think that goes with all the red flags that really are with every single prospect. Not red flags, say some nitpicking that you can make. There are red flags for some people. For us, I think the speed with Kool-Aid's one of them. As we're looking at past our top 4 and even top 3, right? The DeJean thing is even going to play the position. Like our top 3, I think we kind of look at it and you're like, okay, if it hits, it's going to work and it's going to be good. But if it doesn't, I think then you're like, what role are these guys going to play? Are they going to be out of the NFL? That's where we're looking at here. So that's going to do it for our wide receivers and cornerbacks episode. Like, subscribe, and share the show on the way out. We'll be back with new position groups next week. If you want to listen to our quarterbacks episode, that was earlier in the week. That's why you got to say subscribe to us on our YouTube channel or subscribe to us on our podcast platforms. We'll be back with you next week, continuing down this as we get closer and closer to draft season, and we finally put out our mock draft and see how close we can get. Till then, guys, peace.